The seed packets are lying, you all. They are lying. They are saying it takes 65 days to grow carrots. It takes a lot longer, unfortunately, but today I'm going to show you exactly how I grow my carrots and how you can grow them perfectly every time too, and even if you're in a warm climate. So the first thing you need to do when you're growing your carrots is figure out the timing of when you need to grow your carrots. Carrots are a cool weather crop, so they like to grow when the temperatures generally are into like the 50s. They can handle a little bit of frost, but not like a lot. So maybe like a couple of nights down into the 20s. This is what makes them ideal for growing during the winter in my area, which is Florida. I usually start mine in fall. So normally October or November, but this last year I thought I would get ahead of the game and start them in September. Well, that was a mistake. You do not want to start them too early when the ground is too warm because they will not grow. Mine, I put down probably like 1,000 seeds because I knew that it was a little too warm, and I thought, well, add a couple more, they'll probably pop up. Not one. Thousands of seeds and not one came up. So don't do it when it's super warm. The other thing you need to consider is where you're going to plant them. So what I have found out about carrots is, number one, they don't like obstructed sun, which means they want nice, full, non-shaded sun. They're going to do best if they can get at least 8 hours of sun, and make sure that you don't have any plants on the other side of them that are going to block or shade them, because it does really reduce their growing patterns, and they are going to grow a lot slower that way. So once you picked your bed, then you got to prep the bed. So what I like to do to prep the bed is I do loosen up the soil a little bit. I have a little hand tiller, and I will use that to kind of till up the soil a little bit to make sure that the ground is nice and soft for the carrots so they can grow nice and big. The other thing that I do after I've done that is I will lay down bone meal and kelp meal and a little tiny bit of chicken manure pellets that I get from Azure Standard. That is just to help feed the carrots while they grow. The bone meal and the kelp meal are really what are going to feed them. I only do a little bit of the chicken manure pellets because personally my beds, because I grow all year round, they do get depleted in nitrogen, and I have noticed that on some root crops it becomes so depleted that nothing will grow, not even the tops. So I do put a little bit in there. Something to consider if you're like me and you grow in the South, where you grow your carrots pretty much during fall and winter, is that there is less light during the fall and winter. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but we have a summer solstice and a winter solstice. And a summer solstice is when we have the shortest amount of daylight. It's the shortest day of the year. And so the opposite, the summer solstice, has the longest day of the year. So that's why, it'll be daylight before you wake up and it's daylight when you go to bed. But during the winter, we have these long periods of time where they have a lot of short daylight, and plants like light. And so when you're trying to grow crops like root crops or any kind of really sun-loving plant during fall or winter, they're going to grow slower because there is less daylight. So making sure that they land in a bed that gets as much daylight as possibly can is going to help you be able to get those carrots faster. Although there is a second reason why they struggle with growing during our fall and winter, and that is because it is colder. And any plant, when it is colder, is going to grow more slowly. Look at that. Oh, they're so pretty. So even though we have to grow them during that time period, that is what's majorly contributing to the fact that they do not take 65 days. Between the short sunlight and the cooler weather, my carrots, instead of taking 2 months, usually take about 4 months, which I know, pretty shocking. So once I've picked the bed that I want to use and I amend it with that bone meal and that kelp meal, look at these guys, they're doing great. I'm so happy. I'm sorry, but once I've amended the beds, it's time to plant them. And there is a little bit of a trick. You're going to create a furrow, or like a little line that has about maybe 1 inch of depth. And in that little line, you're going to sprinkle in your seeds. Carrot seeds are very tiny. You can attempt to space them 1 to 2 inches apart, but I don't do that. I just kind of sprinkle, and then I go back and I thin them later, which I'll tell you about. Once I have created my furrow and sprinkled my seeds, I water them in, and I water them in super deeply. I put a lot of water on these. The furrow helps those seeds from kind of spraying everywhere, and it keeps them in that line, which is usually about, I do it really close. I space each line or each furrow about 2 inches away from the next furrow, which is pretty close. A lot of people I know like to keep it 4 to 6 inches, but as you can see here, I do this really high intensity growing and it works for me. But if you want more pretty lines, a little less jungle-esque, you can put 4 to 6 inches in between each one of your furrows. Then I personally don't cover the seeds at all. I don't push the dirt over top of it. I don't sprinkle dirt on top. What I do is I take a piece of cardboard, a piece of wood. One year I even used the plastic from the bags that you get soil. Like, so if you were to buy a couple bags of soil to use in your potted plants, I save those plastic bags and I use them and lay it over my seeds. And why you're doing that is because those seeds are so tiny and it is still kind of hot here in October that it's almost impossible to keep the soil moist. So to keep it moist, you have to put something on top of it so that it traps all of that water. It's kind of like mulch, but it's a mulch that you can remove because carrot seedlings are super little dainty things. And they will have a really hard time pushing up through any mulch at all. So if you use a cardboard or a piece of plastic or a piece of wood, what happens is it takes somewhere between 10 to 21 days for them to sprout, which is a really long time, by the way. I think it's crazy that it's so long, but it's a really long time and you have to keep it moist the entire time. It cannot dry out. That was probably my biggest problem that happened in September when I tried to start them early is, you know, they dried out. You got to start oh, look how pretty that one is. Caught myself. Oh, that's so pretty. I love these colored carrots that I'm growing. But you got to check them. So if you put something over top of them, you're going to have to check them every day. I would say starting at around day 7, start lifting it up and looking for them. But be super careful because they are really hard to see. I suggest kind of getting down and leaning and looking at them from the side because they are very like hair-like and you would very easily miss them. And if you do not take the cardboard or the wood or the plastic off in time, they're going to die underneath there. So you have to get them off. So starting on day 7, start lifting it up and looking and seeing if you see those little hair-like seedlings popping up. They're gonna look pretty sad because they have no sun. But within a couple days of removing that, they are going to just pop right out and they're going to start growing really fast. The next part of growing carrots that is pretty much every gardener's worst nightmare is thinning them. I don't know, guys, it's just part of the process that you have to thin your carrots. If you were successful and you were able to plant them exactly 2 inches apart, you don't have to thin them. But for most of us, there's going to be a few that slip through and you're going to have some carrots right next to each other. And if you don't thin them, let's talk about that because I went several years of growing carrots and not thinning them. And what ended up happening was I ended up with the smallest little carrots. I wouldn't even call them the baby carrots from the store. They were just like, let me see if I can find one that looks like it. Yeah, this one probably looks like it. It would look like that, all of them. All of them. It didn't matter how long I waited. It didn't matter, you know, if I fed them. It didn't matter what happened. If they were too close to another plant, and I'm talking within 2 inches, they will do this. They give up. They give up so quickly. So you do have to thin them. And so what I like to do is I like to thin them to 2 inches. Some people get away with 1. I found that kind of does make them smaller too if I do 1 inch. So I see here, this one was a little too close, obviously. I didn't thin them all perfectly. So 2 inches is probably about, on my hand, it's about 3 fingers. I have tiny little hands, so it might be 2 fingers for you. But it's just a nice space. Oh, look at that. It's a nice space so that you have the shoulders of the carrot, and then you have about an equal amount of distance next to it. So you want to basically, whatever size you want your carrots to be, give that, think of it double, and then give that space between each one. So if you want your carrots, if you had them 1 inch, they'd be like this. And that is too close. They're almost touching, right? But if we doubled their size and placed them about that far apart, that is about good. That is about 2 inches. The further you get apart, the larger they're going to get, which is awesome. But there is a limit to how big they get based on their variety and the size that they're supposed to get. So don't get too crazy with it unless you have a world of garden space that you can do that with. So when you have them pop up, and they're probably about maybe 3 inches tall, is a great time to start thinning them. And what I like to do, it works for me, is I take, I have these little tiny clippers, and I will just cut the tops off. They're so small at that point, and they're so young at that point, that it will kill the root underground, even if a tiny amount of root is still there. You can also just pull them at that point. The reason why I don't do that is because usually at that point, all of the seedlings are so small and so close together that when I pull one, sometimes it disturbs the other one, and I end up pulling more than what I intend to. So I find that actually just snipping off their tops is the easiest, least destructive way for me to thin my carrots. Now, in terms of fertilizer, I don't do a lot of fertilizing beyond the preparation that I did on the bed. So I prepare the bed, and then after that, usually about halfway, because since these take 4 months, they're in the ground for a lot longer than what I would like. I do want to feed them one more time. And so what I do is in between my rows, which my rows are only 2 inches, which makes it a little bit challenging, but I will create a small little trench in between my carrot rows, and I will sprinkle in bone meal, and then I will cover the trench back up so that the bone meal is buried. Now the reason I do that is because bone meal and any granular fertilizer that you're going to use needs to be covered. Otherwise it blows away, or the biology under the soil is not going to break it down, which is what's necessary for granular fertilizers. So make sure that if you're going to lay down bone meal mid-season, that you cover it up. And if you don't have the space to make a furrow, you can lay the bone meal down and then lay a little bit of soil or compost on top of it to where it no longer shows. And that works too. In terms of watering, my carrots get about 1 inch a week. To me, during the winter, that equates to 1 20-minute watering once a week. Now I do mulch heavy, so if you're not a heavy mulch user, you might have to end up doing 2 times a week. Really just use the finger poke test. I talk about this a lot, where you stick your finger down into the dirt, basically a full finger, or at least the first two, and check to see if the soil is dry or not. By sticking your finger into the soil, you'll come back up, and if it's a little bit dirty, you'll know that you still have some soil there, because the soil will stick to you and it'll kind of look like dirt. But right now, like this soil, I stick my finger in and yeah, see, it's still moist. It's got that sticky, dirty feel. If it was completely dry, when I came back up, it would be brittle and it would kind of just fall right off. But since it still has that moisture on, you know, you don't have to water. You want to wait until it almost completely dries out before you start watering again, but not to the point that the carrots completely dry out. Thankfully, carrots are almost like their own mulch, because they will create these tops kind of so bushy, and if you plant intensely like I do, they will pretty much shield each other, and then they won't allow the water to escape, which is pretty cool. Now let's talk about when to harvest, because the seed packet says that these carrots should have taken 65 days. Well, that at 65 days they weren't even this big. So at 65 days they were not ready. But the way that I figure out if they're ready is I will kind of pull them back, and I will take my finger and I will dig down kind of next to this one. Mine got buried kind of a little bit deep, but you see here, I'm kind of pulling that soil away from that top of that carrot. Oops, sorry. And I can see that that carrot right there is about 1 inch around. I can feel other carrots next to it, so it didn't get thinned properly. So let's see what this guy's got for us. Oh, it's a pretty decent carrot. But if I had, like this one, if I feel around and I can see that that is not 1 inch, this guy and this guy are not 1 inch, you can kind of tell they're not ready to go yet. I personally, I'm pulling them right now regardless of whether they are big or small, and that's mainly because I don't know if you've noticed, but these carrots are starting to like fall over. It's because it's just getting too hot here. I started them as early as I possibly could. We had a extremely mild winter, and then we have started to heat up pretty consistently, and the carrots just don't like that, and I don't want to have really bad tasting carrots, so regardless of their size, I'm pulling them out. I've had years where I have been able to grow them very, very large if I've had a cool enough winter, but this year, I'm just doing okay. It's okay. Definitely edible. I'm happy. Now, normally what I would do is right when I pull them out, I twist and take the carrot tops off. And the reason why I do that is because if you leave the carrot tops on, they are going to get wilty and really like bendy and rubbery, and nobody wants to eat a rubbery carrot, right? So immediately upon taking them out of the ground, twist that top off, discard the top. You can make pesto out of it, you can use it in compost, you can eat it in salads, whatever you like. It's a little bit too much for me to eat in salads. And then what I like to do is take this and drop it into some water. I just keep a 5-gallon bucket next to me, drop it in the water, and let it stay in some cool water while I finish the rest of my harvest. If you don't have a big harvest, you can just pull them, take them inside, take the tops off, and drop them in your sink in water. Now, I don't go about scrubbing them, so I'm not like taking a brush to them and scrubbing them to get all their dirt off. I'm kind of just trying to get a little bit of the dirt off so that way I can store them. And the way that I store them is I put them in Ziploc baggies, or if you have those reusable bags, I place them in there after they've been soaking for a minute, and then they just go in the refrigerator completely closed, and they last a long time for me that way. But one other way I like to do it is I like to can them. And my new favorite carrot recipe canned is honey carrots. So let's get the rest of these guys out so that we can go make some honey carrots. The recipe I'm using is kind of an adaptation of the ball recipe. There's actually two of them. One is an herbed carrots and another one is a ginger honey carrot. I thought that these were very cool recipes, but I wanted just a straight honey sweet carrot recipe. Not a lot of herbs, not a lot of salt. So I decided to do kind of a combination between those two. The first thing that I did was I had to sterilize my jars, and it's a really easy process when you're using the Presto electric pressure canner, which is now my absolute favorite way to can. I have used a manual canner in the past and it works great. It's just you have to monitor it. In the Presto electric canner you don't have to, which is what I love about it. So once the jars were completely sterilized, I took them out of the canner and then I dumped the water, because you are supposed to put a little bit of water so they don't float. And then I took my homegrown carrots. I kind of like to use the smaller carrots when I'm doing these recipes and leave the bigger carrots for when I'm going to use those in recipes like eating fresh and such. I find the bigger carrots obviously to be more appealing for fresh eating, and then the smaller ones to be more appealing for canning, because nobody's going to know the difference once they're chopped up. So I fill my pint-sized jars. I'm using pint, you can do quarts, but we eat them more as a side dish, so it's not necessary to have like a huge amount. I added a half a teaspoon of salt because one of the recipes, the herbed carrots recipe, did call for that, but honestly I think it probably felt like it was a little too much salt, and I did end up having to rinse it a little bit when I use them. So next time I'll probably use either an eighth or a fourth of a teaspoon. And the recipe calls for 1 tablespoon of honey. I get my honey from a hivery that's up here in Spring Hill. I absolutely love them. I buy like 4 gallons at a time. We use a lot of honey in this house. So it is the best honey. It's raw, it's beautiful. On top of the honey and the carrots and the salt, I have bone broth that I made and canned. I put it on the stove, heated it up so that it's nice boiling hot, and then I poured it over the carrots. I'm using a debubbler just to make sure that there isn't any air pockets, because you want all that liquid to fill the jar completely. Then I'm just wiping the lids with some vinegar, some white vinegar, because the honey is really sticky and it was very, very hard to pour honey at the right ratio into these jars without getting it like everywhere. And so vinegar takes it off really, really easy. I put some new lids and bands on, screwed them on fingertip tight, which basically just means, you know, just screw them on to where they feel tight and not, you know, to where you're He-Man trying to put them on too tightly or too loosely. And then I'm just going to put the jars in my canner. I think that the max it fits when it comes to pints is 6 pints. I might have been able to squeeze another one in there, but I was leaning on the side of being a little more conservative. And then so I seal my Presto Electric canner. I set it for 25 minutes. It will beep when it's ready and tells you to put the regulator on, which is just that little top spinny piece. And then it processed for the 25 minutes. It cooled down probably for another hour, and then it told me that it was safe to open the canner. I removed them from the canner and I let them sit on my counter for 24 hours until they are completely cooled down to check the lids, and all of them sealed perfectly. I hope you enjoyed this episode all about carrots, and especially this recipe of how you can preserve those carrots in a very cool and yummy manner. Happy gardening and happy preserving, guys.